From the mouths of babes, huh? We learn about love and life and everything. Well, it's Valentine's Day weekend, and so, surprise, we're going to talk about love tonight. And so, Valentine's Day is so interesting because, one, I'm single. And so people always say, well, what's it like being single on Valentine's Day? I'm like, well, it's pretty cheap. And they're like, well, did you make reservations anywhere? Like, no, McDonald's really doesn't need reservations for Valentine's Day. It's a great, get to get candy. And Farmville, I'm so excited about Farmville right now because we're giving away Valentine's in the mail. And
then you complain about being single.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I don't think, well, yeah. And so if you'd love to send me any Valentines, my Valentine box is not overflowing just yet. But all the candy and cards, and I talked to the youth on Wednesday night, and I asked them if they still give Valentine's cards, and they say they don't. And I was like, no, really? Because I remember my first New Kids on the Block Valentine's card. That and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle card. And it was always awkward in school when you would walk into class, and you have like a little Valentine's sack that you could put cards in each other's desk, and so you go put them in, and I was trying to be a young Casanova, so I had all of them set out, right? And then you go to your sack, and you're like, I wonder if she sent me one.
She never did.
Erica Treby, wherever you are.
Every year.
Every year. So never sent me one. Many of us have mixed emotions about Valentine's Day. Now when you're married, do you still have to buy Valentine's stuff? You do? Okay. Thank you. All right. I'll put that in my file.
The guys said a word. The guys were all quiet.
All the guys were like, oh, so you mean going to the All-Star game doesn't count, honey? Got this jigsaw here. No. And so what I'd like for us to do, I've got a funny slide. You want me to show you a funny Valentine? Do not give this to anybody. Check out this Valentine's Day card that would be horrible to receive. I'll let you read it.
Oh. You might get in trouble for putting that up there.
I know. So, you'd be perfect if you lost 15 pounds. Gosh, we don't like cats, do we, at all? And something about love and love stories come about on this time. There's the cheesy movies and the Dear John, which I heard is a great movie, supposedly. It is a great movie. Okay.
I haven't had to see that one yet.
Yes, you haven't had to. You haven't gotten the opportunity to see that one
That's
yet.
what I meant.
Right?
That's
how I feel about The Notebook. Like, catch that one on tape. And so we're continuing a series called Dear John. Ironically enough, we've been looking at the third letter to John. And the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about health, talking about healthy relationships. And this week, we read in verse 6 that John is commenting on Gaius' love. It's going to show up on the screen in 3 John verse 6 that they've told the church about your love. You will do well to send them on your way in a worthy manner, a manner worthy of God. That they have gotten reports about the love that this Gaius had, that John was writing to, and that this reports had spread, and they know about this love, and they were to send some other people on their way with this love. And so Josh and I were talking about how do we do a Valentine's talk that doesn't center around just the regular love and all that. We decided that we're going to look at our story, the story that you and I find ourselves in.
Not like our story.
No, not ours.
Right.
Yeah, it's our story that we find ourselves in. And from the pages of Genesis through Revelation, we see that our story is a love story. That if you were to take a common thread and run it from Genesis through Revelation, all the ways in which God interacted with his people and used some of the law and the judges and the prophets and the poets, and then when Jesus came on the scene, and then we see through his life and death and resurrection. And later on we see the epistles where these apostles were writing commentary about Jesus' life all the way through Revelation, where we get painted a picture of heaven and angels and glory, that common thread is love. And that we find ourselves involved in what I would say is the greatest love story of all time. And so hopefully tonight we're going to share with you just a couple of what we'll call chapters that show about this love story. You see, we're drawn to love stories, even if we don't want to admit it or not. I mean, all the way back to famous love movies, okay? Think about some of these, like Romeo and Juliet, okay? Isn't that sad?
That's so nice.
And then there's Gone with the Wind. I mean, classic. I mean, that's just grabs you off the screen. And then some of my favorites, you've got Cinderella. Oh, Beauty and the Beast, of course. And then who could ever forget the Titanic? with Rose and Leo.
I'm so glad you got to do this part.
Are you? You like that one? And then now all the kiddos now these days, they're all about vampires. And so we see here that this Twilight thing is just going all over, and that it's a love story about a vampire. And I try to tell students, don't date vampires. It's not going to end up good. So hopefully they'll see that, that it works out. And all the guys are like, now, does Gladiator count as a love story? Like, what's your favorite love story? Star Wars. All the episodes. And so we're drawn to love stories. We see them. We see that there's this character in them that's fighting for someone. We see that there's good and bad. And hopefully that at the end of the day, the two will meet up again and remain in love. And our story that we find ourselves in is a love story. Most of the stories that we like and that we read have poignant, catching beginning lines. For instance, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. There was a hobbit named Frodo. Oh, what a journey. That a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, these opening lines catch us. Our story begins with a poignant opening line. Simply, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That from the beginning, God, as an act of love, as an act of a way to express this love that was held between the Godhead before time, created in the beginning. The opening scene of our love story, the you had me at hello moment of our love story, that God created from nothing. And we read in the Genesis account this beautiful expression of creation where God starts with the sun, he starts with the sky, he starts with the oceans, and he starts with bringing in vegetation and animals and this whole beautiful scene, and he was calling everything good. That he took what was chaos and brought light into it and order and separation and arranged the planets and just whole act of creation, and it was good. And then he got to the point where he decided to express that love even further by making a human. It said that God breathed life into the dust, what was Adam. That Adam came from the earth. And this love was expressed, and he gave Adam domain over all the garden, got to name the animals. I was thinking one day, it's like around the birds, Adam started to get a little bored, I think. I mean, when you get to name rhinos and aardvarks and things like that, or a duck-billed platypus, okay? So Adam there, and he's going, all right, I'm going to name some birds today. All right, we've got a redbird. Bluebird. He started going.
Kind of gave up.
Yeah, at least give us a fuchsia bird. Didn't happen, right? And so this whole account, and then God realized that it wasn't good for man to be alone. And so then he put him into a sleep and took a rib out and created woman. Thus we have Adam and Eve. And we see that mankind was made in the image of God. Let us create them in our image, in our own likeness. Love expressed. And they went on, and in the garden, God walked during the cool of the day and had relationship, face-to-face, intimate relationship. God was teaching them what it looked like to live in him, to depend on him, to be with him. In the garden, it could be said that we moved hand in hand.
Now, like any good love story, it gets a little complex. It gets a little rough. You hit these negative turns. You hit these ups and downs. And I think we know what happens after the garden. That we experienced this fall, and all of a sudden there was a disconnect between humanity and this God that loved them and created them. And so we move into this time in history where really, kind of broadly speaking, humanity didn't really understand what this God was and how to relate. And so you end up in this situation where early man is trying to wrap his mind around what this world is. And he's trying to figure out how to provide food and shelter. And he's starting to see that he's not in control. That sometimes it rains, and that means that there's food. And then sometimes there's no rain for months, and there's hardship. That they built shelters, and yet, as well as they could have built them at the time, at any moment, a storm or something could happen and destroy it. And all of a sudden, there's like this understanding that I'm not in charge of my own destiny. And so this idea arose of the altar. which was a place where man would go to appease these forces, to appease this God that was in control. And so a rainy season would come and we would have food, and we would take a percentage of our harvest, and we would go and we would take it to the altar and give it to this God to say thank you. And the next year would come, and maybe the rains didn't come as much, and so you had less. And so what's your thinking there? You're thinking that well, I didn't give enough last time, and so I have to give more to appease this God, and so you give more. And then the next year, the rains came, and they were beautiful, and it was good, and you harvested more than you did the year before, but you can't give the same percentage as you did in a down year. So you would have to give more. And this cycle came out of humanity and God where we kept trying to give more and more. And this is where you end up with religions where they would literally cut themselves, saying, I'm willing to give of myself to say thank you, to beg for your mercy. That the religions where they would sacrifice each other, their firstborns, everything, saying, I'm trying to appease this God. As humanity is going through this story of constantly giving more to the altar, the Hebrew people are going through their own particular story. And they end up in Egypt, and they're flourishing in Egypt in numbers, and they're put into bondage. They're put in slavery because the Egyptian people have become afraid that the Hebrew people are going to overrule. And so they cry out to this God they remember. They cry out to this God of Abraham. They cry out to this God of Adam and say, please come. And God hears his people. And we have this beautiful thing where he starts talking to Moses. He's called Moses to come deliver his people. And in Exodus chapter 6, there are these promises that are given, this language that's used about God and his people. And he says that I will rescue you. I will redeem you. I will call you to me, that I will be your God and you will be my people and we will be together. And this language is really important because it's wedding language. In the book of Song of Solomon, this is the language that they use to talk about Solomon and his bride coming together. That this is wedding language. And so as the story progresses, when we see Moses and the law and these things being put together, it's not just an oppressive law. This is a wedding contract. This is a way of saying, these are my expectations for you, my bride, and this is what I'm going to do as your God, that this is the way we're going to function together. And what's really beautiful is on the surface, especially now, I think we look at the commandments and we look at, Leviticus and all this, and not only is it just a terribly interesting read for most of us, but we think it's really oppressive, that you have to do all these different things and all these different rules, and we miss the beauty of what that is, that what the beauty is God just rescued his people from the altar. He doesn't say you don't have to wonder anymore. You don't have to question anymore whether or not you and I are in right relationship, because here's the way we're going to do it. Here's the contract that gives you freedom. And it's an amazing thing. What happens when you get out of the altar is all of a sudden you have food, that you're no longer giving more and more, and all of a sudden his people are free to enjoy life and to live in a secure knowledge that I am married to God, that I am in this relationship with him, that they understood who he was calling them to be, how he was calling them to live, and so they came together in these promises.
As the Israelites continued to live out what it was like to be God's chosen people, really they were charged with, what is life under God's reign supposed to look like? And so we see right in the middle of our scriptures, with a bunch of names that are really hard to pronounce, these prophets that talked about the different ways that the Israelite people should live. And the best way to really sum up the prophets is that God is constantly asking his people to come back. He uses the word remember a whole lot. And the prophets would use this word, remember the God who delivered you out of Egypt, the God who provided food for you, remember. And God used specific prophets as his mouthpiece. They were the spokespeople for him. So all throughout these different warnings, these different messages from God that they can seem harsh at the time, they could seem almost cruel at the time, at the heart of it, God was saying, you are mine, get back to me. We see God on the scene as a very jealous lover here, I think. And I understand, because he's created these people in his image, saying, you are to live and resemble me in all that you do. You've turned your back on me, and you've went and prayed and worshiped other gods. You've been unfaithful to me. I want you back. I want you back. And
he uses that unfaithful language a lot, the adultery, the idea that you have strayed from me, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he wasn't happy. No, not at all. But remember, our story's a love story. And if you look back to some of your love stories, if you've ever been cheated on or left or felt unfaithful, you don't feel exactly good about that. It upsets you. And so here, God, knowing what's best for these people that he created, he formed, breathed life into, is saying, remember me, come back to me, please, please remember. I love it when Hosea comes on the scene. And it's one of my favorite Old Testament books because of the rich imagery that we see of God as a lover. God was looking out and seeing all these people denying him, turning their backs on him. And so he decided to use Hosea as an example of the way God was feeling like he was being treated by the Israelites. And so many of you know the story, but he had Hosea marry an unfaithful woman, an adulterous woman, and use this ongoing relationship to show the Israelite people how unfaithful they'd been to God, their maker. We see that Hosea is this picture of what it was like for God's heart to be betrayed and almost forgotten by these people. One of the things that Hosea says that God wanted him to speak was, it's great language. Therefore, I'm going to allure her. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. I mean, that's a line right there, right? And so I'm going to allure her. I'm going to lure this nation of Israel. And I'm going to speak tenderly to her in the desert. I'm going after her. I'm chasing her. We know what it's like to chase after someone. I mean, I remember the first time I really went after a girl. And it's a hard thing. They make it hard to ask on dates. It's hard. I mean, this one in particular, like, she'd been trained well. She knew not to say yes on the first date. So I was like, oh, your mother trained you so well, bless her. And I remember going, I will do whatever it takes to get this girl to pay me 1 minute of attention. And I think that's what's happening here in this part of our story.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, whatever. We don't have to go to McDonald's. We'll go to Poncho's. That sealed the deal.
We're going to talk later about your dating life. We're going to bring up whole new questions.
That's right. So Hosea was used to feel this pain. It was as if God was using Hosea as a type or a figure, saying, y'all are being unfaithful. Please return to your lover. It's as if God was saying this through Hosea in his marriage to this adulterous, unfaithful wife. He's saying, go take her back, because that's how I love my people. I take them back. The God who takes us back when we are unfaithful, when we try to turn away and run away, and when we try to not exist and be together with this God. We turn our back on him, but he doesn't turn his back on us. We cheat on him, but he doesn't on us. We remain unfaithful, but he is always faithful. And we see that in this chapter, that God loves us so much that he's constantly wooing, constantly pursuing, constantly going after, constantly wanting to allure us. If you look back over the history of your life, you've seen this. You've seen it when you've tried to run away, you tried to walk away. I love one of my professors, we were talking about something, and I said, well, like, is it possible to like be a Christian and have a love relationship with God and run away? He said, well, I don't know exactly the best answer to that. He said, but I wouldn't try. And here we have it. One writer called him the hound of heaven. He is after us, pursuing us. And all throughout this time in the history of the Israelite people, he never gave up. It was as if, even though they might not have known it, they found themselves captured by his love.
And so the story of Israel is this kind of constant wandering, and and they'd come to God, and they'd leave, and then they'd remember God, and they'd go back, and he was constantly pursuing until we get to this stage where God, like, maybe there's a better way to say this. I remember when I was 18 years old, I had come up atheist. My family had never been to church, and that was never something that I had ever considered for my own life. And I remember I was 18 years old, and I heard the story of this Jesus. And it took me a while to understand what it really was, but I heard this story about this guy who embodied God and went and learned this love and like went to his people and shared with them and gave to them and healed them and poured out all this love on these people who hadn't earned it, who hadn't deserved it. And then he went and made this sacrifice. And you know, in the story of like the love story that is our story with God, like this is the moment where, like in Say Anything, John Cusack grabs the boombox and puts it over his head and is like standing outside the window blaring. Like this is the part in the story where for some of us, not all of us, but I think some of us, we know that conversation where you're talking to the girl on the phone for like the first time and you stay up all night just sharing about how, oh, I love that movie too, and The Princess Bride is my favorite as well, and I'm a vegetarian, and like this guy, you know, this conversation, I'm not a vegetarian, but I've said that.
So you lied? It's okay, we're in church.
don't call me out. Yeah, so this is what this moment is this is like this radical act of God saying, you people haven't heard me. Like you haven't gotten it yet, and it's time to like really reach out and say to you that I love you in a way that you can't fathom. Like this is the story of the guy being willing to do whatever it takes, you know, that I'm gonna go climb a mountain, that I am gonna go. So for me, this was when I was, I don't know, 10, 12 years old, which is when you really understand what love is. For me, it was this girl named Monique from California.
I dated a Monique too.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I hope it wasn't the same one.
You're a lot older than me, so probably was it? So,
that hurts. That's all right. And so this girl Monique, and she was, you know, this beautiful girl and like exotic because her name had like multiple syllables and so I was trying to impress this girl, you know, I'm trying to like show off and win her affection, and they were like skateboarding and things, and I had never been on a skateboard before, but I was determined to show her my skating prowess, something like that. And that's when you stepped on the board and I only put one foot on it instead of two and did full splits in front of her, which wasn't the way I had intended to impress her, but it was still pretty impressive, I thought. That we hurt ourselves, you know, trying to win the affection of this person that we love, that there's nothing that's too much to give. And like that's the story of what Jesus did is he came and he said, there is nothing I won't give of me. Like if seeing God is too much, like if being in his presence is too much for you to bear, then let me strip all that away and come to you as a carpenter. Like if seeing me in glory and power is too much for you, then let me just be stripped down and beaten in front of you. Like let me be the lowest of the low to show my sacrifice and my love. And I remember being 18 years old and hearing this story and understanding like what this love was. And like that's when I knew that I'd fallen.
You know, I think we have a desire, we want stories to end well, you know. When we watched Rudy, we wanted Rudy to get into the game, okay? We wanted him to be able to play. When we saw Forrest Gump, we wanted everything to work out between him and Jenna. Real right, okay? We wanted good. We want Frodo to get the ring to the big fiery furnace place so we can save all the little hobbit people, okay? We want those things to happen. We long for stories to end well. I think our story has a pretty good ending. probably the best ending. Because we want the guy to get the girl. We want the underdog to come on top. We want good to beat evil. We want these things. And at the end of our story, we see that Jesus has challenged his followers to continue to live the way that he's lived, under the rule and the reign of God, to go and to be empowered by his Spirit to spread the church, to spread this movement that they've created, and to go and to do it under the name of God. And we see that he promised them and used language about that he was going to come back, but they didn't really understand, they didn't really get it. That he was going to come back and eventually was going to restore everything. That everything was going to be made new, everything was going to be made right, everything was going to be made the way it used to be back when we walked hand in hand in the garden. So Jesus uses rich language to talk about that the story isn't complete, but it has a good ending. We live in between the times. Some say we live in between the trees, that we live in the already but not quite yet, and we feel that. We feel those groans. That when God's reign comes in fullness, that we'll be reunited, and that it'll be this joining of souls, this rejoining of people, of lovers, this ultimate end to a great love story. Speaking of heaven with clouds and glory and angels with lots of wings, and we see this beautiful picture. And I don't know exactly what heaven is going to look like. I mean, there are some things I think we know, but when talking about heaven, Jesus said this. He said that God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, that there will be no more death, sorrow, crying, or pain, for all these things are gone forever. There'll be no hurting, no weeping, no pain, no war, no disease, no famine. That in heaven all will be made right, that everything will be restored, that it'll all be back to the spot that God intended it to be. And the greatest thing about heaven is not these things. In fact, they are great. To imagine a world with no pain and no hurting and no tears and no suffering and no more injustices. And to imagine that is amazing. But the great thing about heaven is that God's home is now among his people. That he will live with them and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. That God himself will be with us. That the way it was in the garden, face to face, God walking together, is the way that it's going to be at the end of our story. So if our story is a love story, it has a great ending. And what's great is each one of us, we get to claim the story because God has a special role and a special part for you in this story. And it helps interpret things. It helps interpret the waves and the ups and downs of life when you look back and go, okay, I'm a part of something a whole lot bigger going on. But I do know that the author of my story is good and wise and loving. And regardless of where I've been or where I'm headed, the story ends well. And that's good to know. So God is inviting us really into a love journey. That the invitation of him pleading with his people, constantly wanting us to come back to him and to remember him, is here for us today. You might be a million miles away from God, that your heart is so turned far from him, but God is wooing you and wants you to be into love relationship with him. And could it be that that's the greatest invitation we could ever receive, that God has went through great lengths to be in relationship with his people. God has went through all sorts of measures and jumped all over hurdles and climbed mountains to be in relationship with us. Not because of anything we've done or anything we've earned to deserve it, but because he is love. And so as we reflect on this during this season, we're constantly thinking about, how do I express love to my friends or to my wife or husband or my boyfriend or girlfriend or my children? How do we express love, whether it be through a cheesy Valentine or chocolate or whatever it might be, we express that love? Could it be that maybe a question we ask in this time is, wouldn't this be a great season for me to stop and to express my love to God? That this God that has went through great lengths to chase me and pursue me, maybe he'd like to hear what's on my heart. Maybe he'd like to hear how I feel. And sometimes the best way to express those feelings is just in a letter. To simply say that you loved me before I loved you. You breathed new life into me. You awakened my soul. We walked together, talked together, lived together. In the beginning, we moved hand in hand. You rescued me from a life of slavery and pain. You pulled me out of darkness and into your light. I never could have imagined the depths of your desire for me. You were jealous of me, wanting me to be yours and yours alone. I was made for you, so we came together in our promises. I was so weak. I am so weak. But you never gave up on me. You kept pursuing me. I wondered. I was unfaithful. I couldn't love you the way you deserved, yet you kept chasing me. I couldn't imagine life with any other, and I found myself captured by your love. You lived a life pouring out love onto others. In your eyes, I discovered grace and beauty. The fullness of your touch, it healed my soul. Your sacrifice taught me and it inspired me, it changed me. I saw your brokenness, and that's when I knew that I'd fallen. I yearn for our hearts to touch, for the fullness of your love poured out. I wait anxiously for the time when we shall be together again. The thought of being in your presence weakens my knees, and I long for the day that we're face to face.